What's a weird thing you've witnessed as a kid, but didn't realize until you were older? My mum had to work when I was little and my older sisters were in school. I was locked in the bathroom during the day until my sisters came home from school and let me out. Sometimes they wouldn't let me out, so they didn't have to watch me. They were 7 and 9 years older than me, and I was somewhat afraid of them because they were not very nice to me. So I would often stay in the bathroom or hide in the hamper. It does explain why I'm perfectly okay to be alone. Lived in a townhouse. In my bedroom at night I would hear the kids next door scream and cry. My parents called the police once, but the man claimed he was playing with his kids and didn't let them in, and apparently the police couldn't do anything. Found out when I was older that the man had later tried to kill the whole family, kids, baby included, with a pair of scissors. I had a cousin that committed suicide by jumping into a quarry. I was 12. My mom and I went to the wake, and when we got to the body, the casket was closed from the chest down, but it was glaringly obvious that he had been at least partially decapitated because his head was just kind of awkwardly shoved on. They tried their best, but apparently you can't make that look natural. So, years later as an adult, I started wondering why in the world my mom would let me see that. So I asked her. It turned out to actually be a thing that no one in the family spoke about openly. My mom didn't know he would look like that, and neither did anyone else. After my cousin died, he was transported to a funeral home. My aunt insisted on an open casket, which the funeral home refused. It somehow escalated to the point that my aunt hired another funeral home on the condition they had a viewing. No one except my aunt knew any of this until after the wake. So people start showing up, view the body, and see that he doesn't have a neck and was decapitated. And it isn't like you can go around and say, for your information, the dead guy is all jacked up from jumping into a quarry and you really shouldn't look. As a kid we had a young family in the NEIGHBORHOOD*. Dad was about 30 and he would always play baseball, wiffle ball, with the neighborhood kids. For some reason anytime the ball went into his bushes he would freak out like, stop, I'll get it. I found out years later after he died, he was an alcoholic and was hiding it from his family. He died of cirrhosis, and I found out he hid his bottles of vodka in the bushes. Really sad to think of now, because despite his ILLNESS/ADDICTION*, he was such a good influence on the kids in the neighborhood. Always taught us to respect elders and work hard at things if we want to become great. He was a great guy. Very sad to think about now. Cross-posting this comment from another question last year that was similar. My mom would sometimes have us play a game called Army, which consisted of me, my mom, and my siblings army crawling around our apartment. Kind of a hide and seek style game. She would yell, hit the deck, randomly, and we would all drop and find a hiding spot. We would giggle and giggle while my mom army crawled around looking for us. We loved the game so much. I realized a few years ago, while retelling the story, that we lived in a really terrible neighborhood, and she would yell it out when she heard gunshots outside the building. I'm assuming she was worried about stray bullets. As a kid coming back from Halloween Horror Nights real late at night, I'd just stare out the window the whole ride home. I saw a truck with the windshield smashed completely out, and a man sitting very stiff and unnatural in front of it. Now when I pass that same spot there's a memorial grave marker there, and I realize that man was probably dead or dying, got thrown through his windshield. When I was about 6 or 7, I remember these two girls came to our house and proceeded to beat my mom up. My mom, being no more than 26 or so, was then shoved into the garbage can. She couldn't get out, and I remember just crying and holding my little sister, who was no more than 1 year old at the time. It didn't really hit me until I was about 17. I never forgot what it looked like. My mom just crying and bleeding while trying to get out of the garbage can. My mother was, and still is, a drug addict. As a kid lots of things happened as a result of it, but one thing I didn't realize at the time that would stick with me, well, probably forever, but at least thus far, is when my sister's childhood best friend's father committed suicide, and my mother brought my sister and I to their house a couple nights later. The funeral hadn't even happened yet, to break in and steal things to sell for drug money. She said at the time that she had permission to do so. She didn't. She just wanted to rob a dead man and brought us along. to help carry things. I still feel guilty about it. I was visiting my grandparents in Switzerland when I was about 8 or 9. One evening I happened to be on the balcony looking down at the street, and I saw a white van stop at the side of the road, and 3 or 4 men got out of it and ran up to a man walking along and grab him, knock him down, and carry him into the back of the van. Then they drove away quickly. It all happened really fast, so much so that the man barely had a chance to call out for help. I didn't understand what I'd just seen, so I asked my grandfather. I remember him looking down at his feet for a long time before he told me not to worry about it. Some years later I spoke to my father about it. He told me that at that time, a lot of immigrants from places like Kosovo were being abducted like that, and it was some sort of turf war. Had a guy die in my arms when I was 15, circa 2007. I had stolen my mum's car to sneak over to my girlfriend's house in the middle of the night. On my way back home, around 2 AM, I saw a car crashed on the side of the road. I of course pulled over and called 911. I had grabbed a flashlight from my mother's glove box and was scanning around in this field next to the fence that the car had crashed into because there was no one inside. It scanned over a body in the field. I rushed over while on the phone with 911, and they told me how to check pulse and help me through CPR. I was previously a lifeguard that summer, but was freaked the F out, so they were calmly explaining it to me on speakerphone. At some point after a little, while he actually began respirating again, but it was very jagged and terrible breathing. He stopped breathing again less than a minute later after what sounded like very liquidy sounds in his breathing. I tried again for CPR to no avail. He never spoke or anything, and could have been brain dead for all I know. I assume it was a collapsed lung or something, but yeah, that guy died in my arms. I remember the ambulance when they arrived said something about him being 18 and intoxicated, but I don't even remember tasting alcohol because I was so hyped up on adrenaline. The craziest part was they didn't even ask me for any information. The police just sent me on my way home as a child because it was a small town and I was close to home. I snuck back in and went to sleep and never snuck out again. I never told my parents that story. My wife is the only one who has heard it until now. I was once at one of those birthday parties in McDonald's, late 90s, as a young child. There was another party going on the opposite side of the restaurant, so it was pretty chaotic with kids running around everywhere and only a small amount of adults to corral them. There was a man wearing a red t-shirt and blue jeans sitting and eating kind of close to the other party, which was odd in itself, because most adults that were coming in were getting their food and getting out of the noise of 20+ screaming kids as fast as possible. I only remember him because looking back on it a little while later, I saw him leaving the McDonald's with a kid from the other party. The kid wasn't struggling or anything, but the man was kind of rushing him out. In my kid brain I assumed it was his dad or whatever, but a couple days later my parents found out through mutual friends that there was an attempted kidnapping in the McDonald's we were at. I don't know if this is true, but part of me feels like I witnessed the attempting kidnapping. Thank God they caught the guy and the kid was okay, and because of that incident my parents lectured my brother and I heavily on stranger danger. When I was 8, I took care of my father in home who was dying of AIDS. Mom wasn't in the picture. None of the adult family wanted to be near him and help out because they all said it was contagious. This was the 90s and HIV ignorance was still at an all-time high. I changed his diapers, showered him, fed him, gave him his pills until he died. As a kid, that was my normal. I didn't realize it at the time, but it really effed me up. He was my hero and the strongest man alive to me, and seeing him in such a vulnerable state and reduced to nothing really messed up my brain. It just kinda numbed me. Literally could not cry for 12 whole years after that. I still struggle nowadays to feel what I'm supposed to feel in certain situations, but I've gotten a lot better and am definitely more in touch with my emotions. I watched my friend try to murder his older brother. They were constantly fighting with each other, and I knew their father was a drinker and would hit them, so it was a rough environment they grew up in. One day a group of us were at their house alone, no parents. They start fighting, and one of them pushes the other through a glass pane door, shattering it. This sets them off to real fighting, and my friend grabbed a kitchen knife and then tackled his brother. He jammed the knife downwards towards his brother's face with all his body weight, and the older brother was barely holding him up. Luckily he was able to shove him to the side and wrestle away the knife. My friends and I were stupidly laughing and were like, damn, they're really going at it. Even then I knew it was crazy, but I grew up in an unstable home myself, so it didn't affect me much. Years later, I shudder to think what could have happened. When I was 6, or maybe 7, it was around my birthday, I saw a girl get hit by a car. We lived in a small town where the elementary, middle, and high schools were all together, so all grade levels rode the buses together and all the buses had to go down the same road to get to the school. The bus in front of mine stopped, so a girl could cross the street and get on. I watched her start to cross the street. I watched the car come over the hill, slide on the stones. It was a dirt road. I watched it hit her body, and I watched the blood sink into the dirt. Her backpack came open and her shoes came off. One landed near my window. It wasn't until after the police had gotten there and were covering up her body that one of the older kids noticed me watching and moved me to the other side where I couldn't see. I never mentioned that I saw it to anyone and just kind moved on. Like 10 years later in a forensics class we were talking about car accidents and it sorta brought the whole thing to the surface. My dad grabbing a knife while punishing my brother. Dad had him sit at the kitchen table and ordered him to put his hands on the table. Dad then put the knife edge on one of my brother's thumbs and threatened to cut his thumbs off. Can't remember what it was about, but this caused me to fear my father from a very young age. My brother was only around 9 or 10 years old at the time. When I was around 10 years old I was sleeping over at my best friend Juan's house. We usually stayed up really late playing and would sleep in until like 11 or 12, which I loved because I rarely got to do that at my house. At about 8 AM his dad comes into the room and tells me to get dressed because he needed my help. His dad was a big drinker, so either his breath reeked of beer from last night or he had one for breakfast. But I didn't think much of it because it was normal. He tells me he needs my help picking out a toy for Juan as a surprise and we were going to drive to Walmart. So we get in the car and drive down to the Walmart, which was like 10 minutes away from his house. It was a pretty awkward ride and he starts asking me questions to make small talk, like how I was like school and if I had a girlfriend yet. We get to the Walmart and he takes me to the toy section and asks me what I think Juan would like. I walk around and see Darth Vader's TIE Fighter. Juan and I were huge Star Wars fans and even went to go see Empire Strikes Back in theaters when it was re-released, so I knew he would like it. He buys the toy and then we have another awkward car ride back. He thanks me for helping and asks me to keep it a secret. I changed into my pajamas again and tried to go back to sleep, but about 10 minutes later his dad comes in and surprises him with the toy and gives me a wink. At the time I thought it was such a nice thing for his dad to do for him, but years later I found that the reason we went on this mission to get the toy was because he had been really drunk a couple of nights before and hit Juan, so he wanted to make it up to him. So what I thought was this wholesome moment was sullied after I realized what he had done, and also the fact that he was probably drunk when he drove me to Walmart. In the middle of the night that day after Christmas, when I was 5 I woke up to screaming and loud noises from the living room. I walked out of my bedroom and into the living room and saw the Christmas tree knocked over and my mom grabbing at her chest and breathing heavy. My dad was screaming at her to stay with him. I didn't understand because she was right there. My little sister wandered out of her room and started crying. My dad told me to hold my mom's hand and he would be right back. I grabbed onto my mom with one hand and my little sister with the other, while my dad ran to get the neighbor to stay with us so he could drive my mom to the ER because the ambulance was taking too long. My mom had her first heart attack that night at the age of 30. My mom would spend the entire day on the computer and chat rooms talking to her friend while dad was at work. She was so glued to the computer that my siblings and I could walk in the room and yell things at her trying to get her attention and she wouldn't even notice us. We took care of ourselves. I was like 10 at the oldest and I was forced to bottle feed my baby brother during this time and take care of him because my mom just wouldn't otherwise. What I really hate is that I'm pretty sure I told my dad that I was having to be his caretaker and he didn't do anything to make the situation better for me. I don't know if he knew she was having this emotional affair or not, but how could he not have? Anyway, one day my mom decided we were going to leave my dad while he was at work so she could run off and be with this friend. She took myself and my 5 younger siblings while my dad was at work and drove us on a cross-country road trip from NV to O to surprise her online lover, who was also married. And once we got to Ohio and she told him we were there, he freaked and ghosted her. At the time, the situation was confusing for me because my siblings and I just wanted to go home. It clicked later that my mom has always been a very emotional unstable person and my siblings and I all have heavy trauma now as adults because of it. When I was a kid, all the kids would sleep in the basement on Christmas Eve to give space for Santa to drop off the presents. That night there was a lot of noise coming from outside on the street, but we couldn't see anything because there was snow covering the egress. My mom came downstairs and told us to stay there, but soon we heard sirens and saw police lights reflecting in the snow. There was a lot of commotion that we couldn't see. Then my dad came downstairs with a very real Santa Claus. He told us that his sleigh crashed in the snow and that the kind police officers were helping him get unstuck. And while they were working he was visiting the kids in the neighborhood. He pulled out a present for each of us and sat with my family while we opened them and sang a few Christmas songs. When things calmed down outside he went back to delivering toys. Years later I learned that there was a large gang fight outside of our house and that a few people died right outside. An older man from our church lived down the road and knowing my parents had undoubtedly scared children at home, put on his Santa suit and came over once the police arrived. Santa was a hero to me as a child, but that man is a hero to me now.